In 1945, two planes took off from American soil and changed the world forever. 100,000 people died instantly. But ask any American where those planes departed from, and they'll say they don't know. Here's the truth. There's a place in America where atomic bombs were loaded, where thousands were enslaved while wearing Made in USA labels, where an entire civilization was erased, 6,000 miles from the mainland. Hidden in the Pacific Ocean lies America's darkest secret, the Northern Mariana Islands. And what happened here will haunt you. 14 tropical islands stretch across the Pacific. They're technically American territory, but most Americans couldn't point to them on a map. The Northern Mariana Islands passed between empires like currency: Spain, Germany, Japan, the United States. Each one left scars. These islands aren't just dots on a map. They're volcanic peaks rising from the Philippine Sea, part of a massive arc stretching from Guam to Japan. Coral reefs surround pristine beaches. Jungles hide limestone caves used for centuries as burial sites and shelters. But beneath this paradise lies something sinister. The indigenous Chamorro people lived here for 3,500 years. They built massive stone structures called latte stones, some weighing several tons, standing over 20 feet tall. Massive pillars topped with hemispherical caps, forming the foundations of ancient houses. To this day, nobody knows exactly how they moved them. No written records explain the engineering. No oral traditions survive to tell us, because those traditions were systematically destroyed. Then 1,521 arrived. Ferdinand Magellan landed and immediately labeled them the Islands of Thieves after locals took a small boat. His response was brutal: burned villages, murdered residents, systematic destruction. But that was just the opening act. The Spanish began the Chamorro Wars in the 1,680 seconds. What followed was genocide in slow motion. The population crashed from an estimated 50,000 to just 3,700 by 1710. Disease, warfare, forced conversions, entire bloodlines vanished. Then Spain made a decision that would haunt these islands forever. They forcibly relocated every native inhabitant from the northern islands to Guam. Thousands of people ripped from their ancestral homes, entire communities destroyed. The northern islands were left completely empty. Think about that. An entire civilization erased by colonial decree. For over a century, these islands stood abandoned. Ghost villages reclaimed by jungle. Latte stones standing as silent monuments to a vanished people. When descendants finally returned in the 1800s, they found their history had been stolen, the connection to their ancestors severed. Spain lost the Spanish-American War and sold the Northern Mariana Islands to Germany for 25 million pesetas. The Germans wanted copra dried coconut meat for oil production. They established plantations and brought in laborers. Then World War I erupted. Japan seized the islands without firing a shot. The League of Nations gave Japan a mandate to govern the territory, and Japan had plans. They brought 20,000 Japanese settlers, farmers, fishermen, merchants. By the 1,930 seconds, Japanese outnumbered Chamorros 3-1 on Saipan. Sugarcane plantations covered the islands. Towns sprouted with Japanese names, Japanese schools, Japanese infrastructure. The Chamorro people became minorities on their own land. Then came World War II, the 15th of June, 1944. 71,000 U.S. Marines and soldiers stormed Saipan. The Battle of Saipan lasted 24 days. 3,000 Americans died. 30,000 Japanese soldiers died. But the civilians? That's where it gets horrific. Japanese propaganda had convinced civilians that Americans were barbaric monsters. When defeat became inevitable, thousands of Japanese civilians fled to the northern cliffs of Saipan, Banzai Cliff, Suicide cliff. They jumped. Parents threw their children off first, then followed. Over 1,000 people died on those cliffs. American soldiers watched through binoculars, helpless. Some tried using loudspeakers to convince them to surrender. They kept jumping. Today, those cliffs are memorials. Flowers and offerings line the edges. You can still see the rocks below where bodies fell. The U.S. captured the islands, and that's when the real transformation began. Jump to 1,945. The island of Tinian, just 39 square miles of land, had been transformed into the largest airbase on Earth. 6 runways, hundreds of B-29 bombers, 50,000 personnel. More aircraft than all of the United Kingdom's airfields combined. From above, the runways formed patterns that inspired Manhattan's street names. 8th Avenue, Broadway, 42nd Street. The island became Manhattan Project in miniature. 2 bomb loading pits were constructed on North Field. Each pit was carefully designed, a concrete platform where the bomb could be loaded from beneath the aircraft. Security was absolute. Only a handful of men knew what they were handling. On August 6th, the Enola Gay was loaded with a uranium bomb nicknamed Little Boy. The crew flew through the night. 6 hours later, Hiroshima ceased to exist. 3 days later, Boxcar carried Fat Man. Nagasaki followed. Over 100,000 dead in seconds. Hundreds of thousands more from radiation sickness, burns, injuries. Cities turned to ash and shadow. The atomic age didn't begin in Los Alamos or Oak Ridge. It began here, on U.S. territory that most Americans didn't even know existed. Most soldiers stationed at North Field had no idea what they were witnessing. The operation was so classified that men watched planes take off every morning without knowing they were launching humanity's most devastating weapons. One mechanic said he serviced a plane that flew out one morning and returned acting strange. Only decades later did he realize he'd worked on the Enola Gay. Those bomb pits are still there, covered in glass panels, tourist attractions now. You can stand in the exact spot where nuclear weapons were loaded onto bombers. Plaques commemorate what happened. Photos show the mushroom clouds. But here's what they don't tell you in those memorials. The Chamorro people and other islanders who witnessed this had no choice in the matter. Their land was used to launch weapons that killed hundreds of thousands. They carried that weight without ever being asked. And here's the terrifying part. The military is coming back. The Pentagon signed a $409 million contract to restore North Field. Those same runways that launched atomic bombs are being rebuilt. The reason? China. The military calls it distributed lethality, spreading forces across multiple bases so no single strike can cripple operations. Tinian sits, perfectly positioned, close enough to Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the Philippines to matter strategically. They're planning to station bombers there, store munitions, conduct training exercises. Local residents, all 2,000 of them on Tinian, are scared. Town hall meetings turned tense. One resident said it plainly. How do we even know they won't test another nuclear weapon here? Their island could become ground zero in the next Pacific War. The military also controls 2/3 of Tinian's land under a 99-year lease signed in the 1982nd. They promised economic development, jobs, infrastructure, a movie theater, for crying out loud. None of it came. Instead, they want to conduct live fire drills, drop bombs, launch missiles, on an island where civilians live, raise children, try to build lives. One mayor said, "We're grateful for the military presence, but we're also afraid we'll be forgotten again." Now we get to the darkest chapter. Because while you were living your life in the 1992nd and 2000s, slavery was happening on American territory. The Northern Mariana Islands became a garment manufacturing hub. Gap, Tommy Hilfiger, Walmart, Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Levi's, Liz Claiborne, all made clothes here. Why these remote islands? A legal loophole. The islands could set their own immigration and labor laws, while products still carried the Made in USA label. They weaponized it. Over 30,000 workers, mostly young women, from China, the Philippines, and Bangladesh were recruited with promises of good American jobs. Recruiters showed photos of factories with air conditioning, promised $4 per hour wages, painted pictures of the American dream. They paid thousands in recruitment fees, money their families didn't have. Money borrowed from loan sharks at crushing interest rates. When they arrived, their passports were confiscated immediately. They were locked in barbed wire compounds, surrounded by guards, forced to work 20-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Some went 5 months without receiving